There were some 24 people in front of Henry, all waiting for medical treatment. He'd been sick with the feline flu for weeks now, laid up in his bedsit, unable to work. At least he'd been free to use the VR. Being stuck at home wasn't his idea of fun. More were behind him though. There were hundreds of cases in Onan Colony, and the territorial borders had delayed the arrival of help. Now that it was here, every sick cat in the city was trying to get treated, queuing up at every clinic and hospital. He could hear people behind and ahead of him, all complaining about the city's distribution plan. Why weren't there any more centres? Why did it take so long to get here? Why? It had been Henry's experience that no matter how many distribution sites they had organised, there would always be someone who wasn't happy with it. Complaints were not the most common conversation though. The Hearth independence was. It had been the primary topic on the news and on the lips of many in the city. Onan's population is 70% Venusian humans, most of them angry with the UNS. He was too. They were the ones pushing borders in the name of national defence. They had slowed medical aid to a crawl, but he wasn't sure how further isolation was going to help. It seemed to him that leaving the UNS would only create more borders, slowing traffic further. The line shuffled forward. He'd been in the queue for 2 hours already, surrounded by the coughing and sneezing of so many. Most, like him, were using masks or nanoclouds to prevent spread, but some were not. The hot breath of the person behind him washing over his neck fur as they coughed directly on him yet again. Not that it could get any worse, but it would be nice if they at least turned their head or covered their mouth. But instead, they acted like he wasn't even there. He never really liked being in such close quarters with others. He liked his space. That's why he still lived in Onan. Despite the size of the colony, it had always maintained a low population, plenty of parks and open spaces. Of course, he was worried about the state of the parks. He'd not been able to get to work for weeks. Half the staff in the park maintenance were Tom cats, making it unlikely that the city's most beautiful quality was still as wonderful. The line shuffled again. He was still a couple of shuffles away from the tables, 6 tired-looking nurses, each dealing with patients. None of them were cats, of course. Most were humans of one sort or another, but they looked equally exhausted, equally bored, and equally underpaid. Henry's oldest was a nurse for more than a decade. Now he works in virology. Fortunately, he wasn't on Venus during the war, having moved to Saturn 50 years back. Only his youngest lived in the city. She was going through college when the war started. Classes still haven't started again. The city's pandemic and supply shortages keeping her from becoming a qualified molecular engineer. Henry wasn't so disappointed though. She was planning to move off-world as soon as she passed. The war and the flu had kept her local, but he would never have wished for that. Now he found himself hoping she could leave, get out of the inner system. Saturn was no part of the war, and the UNS had very few colonies there. It would be much safer. The line shuffled. He found himself browsing Saturn's colonies, seeing if any of them were like Onan. There were, of course. More than a dozen habitats were similar, but Titan was far and away the best. Partial terraforming and bioforming had left hundreds of kilometres of wilderness. There were forests and plains, even hunting seasons. Even the cities were amazing, their silken structures flowing between great rocky spires and carved stone pillars. It really looked like a pretty place to live, and it would put him within real-time distance of his eldest and his 7th child. It had been more than a century since he and George had been able to speak in real time. He was not one for travel, and his lovely wife was a native of Saturn, so it made sense to stay out there, free from the worries of the inner system. The line shuffled again. This time it put him in a booth, a tired nurse smiling at him and gesturing at a seat. Henry sat, letting her get on with it, as he browsed jobs and apartments. Titan was apparently much cheaper than Venus. He could get a house, 5 bedrooms, for the price of his bedsit. As he thanked the nurse and headed out of the clinic, his mind was made up. It was time to move somewhere new.